Welcome back to F1 Brake Check. Today, we visit Monaco, where the world's largest game of who has the biggest gentleman's sausage is measured in the length of super yachts. On today's foray, we will visit the track and talk about the history of the Monaco Grand Prix. Corey will scramble my brain matter with the Stump the Pundit segment, and we'll have our hot takes on this weekend's action and get you ready for next weekend. So buckle up, because today we are in the land of the rich and famous, despite being neither, on F1 Brake Check.
Welcome. You are listening to F1 Brake Check, the epic podcast for all things Formula One, where we discuss technology, history, news, and perspective. With your hosts, Scott Vick and Corey Broom.
Awesome.
All right, that one will work. So, all right, 3, 2, 1. Welcome back to F1 Brake Check. My name is Scott Vick. I am one of your intrepid hosts, and with me, as always, is my brother in arms, my ride or die, my pundit for life, Mr. Corey Broom. Corey, how you doing this week, sir?
Good. Yeah. We had yesterday off in remembrance of Memorial Day. So 3-day weekend, always welcomed. How about you?
Yes. I'm the same. It actually ended up with my son's graduation. It ended up being a 5-day weekend for me, so it was all
Beautiful.
right.
Beautiful.
It was not bad at all. So yeah, so no, it's I'm doing well. Living the dream. So we had probably the biggest weekend in racing of the year. So it was all in all, it was a good weekend.
Yeah, no doubt about it.
All right, so let's get into our history. On a shimmering coast of the French Riviera lies the sovereign principality of Monaco. Every May, the tiny nation hosts what is arguably one of the most famous races in all of motorsports, the Monaco Grand Prix. A jewel in Formula One's crown, a gauntlet through the glamour, a test of precision, nerve, and absolute perfection. For nearly a century, the world's finest drivers have come to the principality not just to win, but to become legends. The story begins in 1929. The first Monaco Grand Prix was more than just a race. It was a statement. With the backing of Prince Louis II and the Automobile Club of Monaco, the race roared into life through the tight, twisting streets of Monte Carlo. William Grover Williams, a British-French driver in a British Racing Green Bugatti, took the inaugural victory. But the real winner was the circuit itself, an improbable creation, a serpentine stretch of tarmac through a city never meant to host such madness. And yet, Monaco endures. It joined the Formula One World Championship calendar in 1950 and became a permanent fixture in 1955. Since then, it's seen the rise and fall of titans, from Fangio to Prost, Senna to Schumacher, and more recently, Hamilton, Verstappen, Leclerc, and most recently, Norris. The race has crowned kings and humbled champions. It is here that Graham Hill became Mr. Monaco with 5 wins in the 60s. It is here that Ayrton Senna ascended into myth, dancing his car through the barriers to 6 wins, 5 of them consecutive. A feat so surgical, so supernatural, it left even his rivals in awe. But before we drown in nostalgia, let's set the scene, the track itself. Just 3.337 kilometers long, or just right at 2 miles, yet packed tighter than a yacht party during the Grand Prix weekend. It winds through the streets of Monte Carlo, threading a needle between Armaco barriers and little more than a whisper's margin for error. There is no room for a mistake, no runoff areas, no gravel traps to catch a wandering rear end. If you get it wrong, you hit a wall. Simple as that. The track begins with the blast into Saint-Devoux, a deceptively tricky right-hander that tempts the brave and punishes the overzealous. Then it's the flat-out charge to Beau Rivage, rising to Moussant and the iconic Casino Square, so named for the world-famous gambling establishment. Downhill into Mirabeau, then the tight right-hander of the Grand Hotel Hairpin, the slowest corner in all of Formula One, taken at just 40 kilometers per hour, with steering locked and tires screeching in protest. Then comes the tricky double right at Portier, spitting cars into the tunnel, the only one on the F1 calendar, a thunderous, blinding rush into the dark and blasting out into the light. Emerge too fast and the Nouvelle chicane awaits, hungry for carbon fiber. Tabac, the swimming pool, chicanes. The Rascasse, all iconic, all claustrophobic. Each corner a character, each lap a story. Every millimeter counts. And yet, for all its beauty and prestige, Monaco is brutally unforgiving. Overtaking is a rare commodity, a nearly impossible to execute calculated gamble. Drivers often say that qualifying is more important here than anywhere else in the world because pole position can be half the battle. A defensive masterclass on Sunday is often enough if you can keep your car out of the wall, that is. Over the decades, Monaco has produced moments of sheer cinematic magic. In 1982, a chaotic final few laps saw 4 different drivers lead and nearly none of them finish. In 1996, just 3 cars saw the checkered flag. In 2004, Michael Schumacher collided with Juan Pablo Montoya in the tunnel during a safety car period because Monaco doesn't forgive even when you're going slowly. In 2011, Jenson Button, Fernando Alonso, and Sebastian Vettel delivered a thriller of strategy, pace, and near disaster, with tires disintegrating and barriers brushing past. And who could forget Daniel Ricciardo's redemption in 2018, nursing a wounded Red Bull with no MGUK to a heroic victory, avenging his heartbreak of 2016. And yet, the most poetic moments came in 2021 when Charles Leclerc, the local hero from Monaco, took pole, only to crash and fail to start the race. The weight of a nation on his shoulders, the dream postponed. Leclerc would make good 3 years later by claiming victory in 2024. Still, every May, the circus returns. The yachts bob in the harbor, the casino lights up, celebrities sip rosé from balconies, and beneath it all, the rumble of V6 hybrids echo off of the walls, a modern heartbeat for an ancient race. The Monaco Grand Prix is not the fastest, it's not the most strategic, but it is, without question, the most mythical. A time capsule of glamour, grit, and greatness. A race where the reward isn't just points, it's immortality.
You're being very, very politically correct of this race. The Sunday did it for me. It was funny. Earlier on, I know we'll talk about this, but on Friday when free practice was going through, I was like, man, I really like Monaco. It has all that, history to it. It has, so many stories. And then by the end of the race on Sunday, I was like, it wouldn't be too bad if we skipped this one. Imola would be so much better.
Yeah, that's true. It was a bit of a snore fest, and we'll really get into it in the news section. So let's go ahead and go on to our next section, and then we can really get into the meat of the thing. So up next is our probably, without a doubt, my favorite part of the week. So as most of you know, I am a longtime fan of Formula One, and every week, Corey takes and tries to scramble up my brain matter by testing my knowledge of the history of Formula One, the cars, and its drivers in a segment we call Stump the Pundit. So, Corey, what do you have for me this week?
Before the hybrid era began in 2014, who was the team that won the championship from a constructor standpoint? Before going into the hybrid era, who was the team that won the constructors? The last team.
Okay, so that would have been 2013. So that would have been Red Bull.
Yeah. I honestly thought I was going to get you on that one. Damn it. Okay. All right. Which year did Schumacher make his Formula One debut, and which team was it?
Okay, so his Formula One debut was with Jordan at Spa-Francorchamps in 1992.
91.
91. Yes, you're right. My bad. Jordan 191. So yes, you're right. 91.
I can't claim that one because you got so many of the other ones. Which F1 circuit holds the record for the most Grand Prix?
That would be Imola because they have hosted almost every single Italian Grand Prix except for a handful of them. So I believe it's Imola has the record for the most.
It's actually Monza. Monza has hosted every single year.
I meant Monza. I said Imola, but I meant Monza.
I put it in your head.
Yes.
In 2008, the Brazilian Grand Prix, who won that race and ended up winning the world championship by 1 point.
Okay, 2008. That was probably one of the scariest races ever. That's the one where I believe it was Mark Webber went ass over tea kettle, going down the straight. Let's see. That was the one where I think it was initially, uh, if I remember correctly, I think it was Kimi Räikkönen was declared the winner, but then afterwards they actually figured out that no, it was actually Jarno Trulli who won the race. And then the championship was decided by 1 point in Lewis Hamilton's favor over Felipe Massa.
Yeah, that's correct. And that's it for Stump the Pundit.
All right. Well, good stuff. I liked it. So, all right. Well, let's take and get on to our news section. So, first of all, we have to address the elephant dancing around the edges of the room and everything. So, first of all, what is your thoughts on the mandatory two-stop requirement and what it did for the racing this weekend at Monaco?
So initially, I thought, the two-stop thing was not the best. I thought that it was going to really be more of a strategic race versus drivers getting out there and dueling it. But it ended up not being that way at all. The intention was there, so I'm not going to fault them for coming up with that mandatory two-stop because they were trying to make something, shake it up a little bit. So anything was better than nothing. But in this case, Racing Bulls basically killed everybody else's race behind them. And it just
And Williams.
and Williams as well. Yeah. So it just, to me, again, it's one of these circuits that very much like how much I hate Las Vegas. Very much like Las Vegas. I don't see. There's so many other phenomenal tracks in the world. Why are we messing with these two? I understand history and everything like that with Monaco, but it's so boring. There's no rationale for. Anyway, what are your thoughts?
Okay, well, first of all, we talked about this after the Monaco Grand Prix last year,
Yeah,
after the processional race in which the top 10 qualifiers didn't change positions at all. They finished exactly as they qualified. And we had talked about, some of the ideas that were floated at that time about trying to make the racing a little more exciting at Monaco. And one of them was the mandatory two stop, which I think that by making it a mandatory thing, I think it was the right idea. They just didn't
yeah,
execute it
exactly.
correctly.
Yep.
First of all, I agree with Martin Brundle, who said that they should have, in addition to making it mandatory for two stops, they should have made it so that at least one of those stops had to be done, like say in the first third of the race, leaving that first stop open to interpretation. And by, some of the teams going very late and deep into the race before they made their first stop. I
Yeah.
think that was a mistake. I think that first of all, they should have said, okay, it's 76 laps, so you have to do the first stop within the first third of the race. The second thing is that we had talked about this last year when we were talking about the Monaco Grand Prix, that I think that by sticking to you must use two of the compounds. I
Yeah.
think that if you're going to have two stops, you should make it so that you have to use all three compounds.
Oh, that's a good
At
one.
least
Yeah.
was for Monaco. So they should have had to have used the hard, the medium, and the soft all during the race, because I think that would have really changed up the complexion of the strategy. Because it's like, because if you have the first thing that we talked about with the mandatory stop within the first third of the race, it's like, do you go super soft? Do you go with the softest one, try to make up as much ground as you possibly can, do your first stop, do like
Yeah.
a long stint on the hards, and then a very short stint at the end with the mediums? or do you or any combination of those three? But by using all three compounds, that would definitely figure a little more into the strategy part of it.
Right.
Um, but I don't know. There's some other things that I've thought about. It's like I have it here in the show notes, so we'll go ahead and talk about it now. Um, one of the things that some of the most memorable Monaco races have
Mhm.
always been the ones where it's wet. Because once it starts raining, strategy, everything else is completely thrown out the window. And because it is such a tight circuit, it generally leads to a lot of chaos and everything. And I think that maybe is that what we need to do is maybe, they turn on the sprinklers, like before the race starts, at the very least, if there's no rain in the forecast, just drench the track at the start, make them start on wets, and then and then maybe have a mandatory two stop. So as the track starts to dry out,
Yeah.
maybe it starts to add something. Now I know that some people would say, "Oh, well, that's just artificially, creating, drama and everything, and that doesn't have any place in Formula One." But at this point,
It's got
because
it.
in my
Yeah.
opinion, Monaco is never going away. There
Right.
is just entirely too much money involved because I mean it's like with other places like Las Vegas and stuff and Miami and some of more the other races where the money is much more on display. There
Hmm.
is no place in the world where it is more on display than in Monaco.
Yeah.
I mean, this is literally the playground of billionaires. And so long as it continues to be an independent principality that is a tax haven for the mega rich,
Yeah.
there is always going to be a race in Monaco. Pure and simple. I don't care that if the FIA or if F1 ever said no, we're not racing in Monaco anymore, I guarantee you some billionaire is going to come along and say, "Here is a pile of cash, keep the race in Monaco." And they're going to go, "Okay." So no, the race is never going to go away. That's pure and simple because there is
Yeah.
just too much money involved with the Monaco Grand Prix. And not only that, but it's also, I guarantee you, these are the things that are never published and everything, but there are whispers and rumors and things like that of the literally mega billion-dollar deals that are made by all of these by all these businessmen and everybody else
Hmm.
that are made over the weekend of Monaco. And it's like because it is a atmosphere that is unlike any other race in on the Formula One calendar. And because of that, because of a lot of these mega deals are done over that weekend, that's the reason why it's never going to go away.
Mm.
So we've got to do something. Maybe, somebody else floated the idea of maybe making some, minor tweaks to the circuit from a history standpoint. I don't see that happening,
Right.
just simply because there are some parts of it that are just too, of that track that are just now. I mean, it has gone through some changes over the years, but they've always been very, very minor changes
Right.
that I don't think that we're going to see, a huge reprofiling of the track or
Yeah.
anything else, but they've got to, if we're going to have to suffer through this snooze fest, they're going to have to do something to improve it, or or maybe we can get into this. George Russell floated the idea that the most exciting part of the weekend, at least was the last few years, has been qualifying. Maybe we make this just a qualifying only race. We
Hmm.
go out there and they do some kind of knockout, qualifying, kind of like they, and maybe that becomes the race, and whoever qualifies the fastest,
Yeah.
that's who gets the points. That's who gets the trophy. They have the podium ceremony. The crown prince gets up there. The royal family gets up there. They do their thing. They spray the
Right.
champagne. Everybody packs up the cars and they go on to the next race. I'm actually, as much as the thought of not having an actual race,
Yeah.
I'm kind of liking that idea that as long as we're going to still have to visit Monaco, let's make this, and maybe you do it over, a over two different segments on two different days, so that way maybe the weather might take and throw a monkey wrench into it and
Yeah,
stuff like that.
true.
So it's like, you have your free practice on Friday, and you have a third practice session on Saturday morning. You have the first qualifying session in the afternoon or in the early evening on
Hmm.
Saturday, and then you have the final qualifying, on Sunday. Make it, maybe, make it so that in qualifying, it's like in, the first one, you can only use, just say the hard compound. And then on the second day, you can use any compound that you want. Just something along those lines. But I mean, something has got to be done, because this race, although it was not as bad as last year's race, it was still freaking awful. And
Yeah.
we've got to do something about it.
No, I agree. Yeah, I mean, it, it's unfortunate, right, that there's so much money in Monaco. So there's no way, like you said, there's no way this race is leaving. So the alternative is, just to try and make something up, to make it creative, to make it a little bit more exciting. Because man, this is just, in my opinion, I think this one was worse than last year's
Oh, well, I don't know,
because of the strategy. Because
yeah,
that made me more mad than anything, from
yeah,
a fan standpoint, because
yes,
nobody could advance because Racing Bulls and Williams was up front.
yeah.
That that really goes against really exactly what they were wanting to do.
No, I couldn't agree with you more. And I just had a light bulb moment, though.
Yeah,
Here's an idea, and I hope somebody from the FIA or F1 is listening to me. Let's do this. You guys seem to be all in on the sprint, which, personally myself, I hate. But let's do this. Instead of the way that we're doing it now, how about we have two practice sessions on Friday? We have a sprint qualifying on earlier in the day on Saturday. We have a sprint race on Saturday afternoon. And then, and here's where the light bulb comes in. Whatever you do on Sunday, reverse the grid. So whoever finishes first on during the race on, but you got to give them some kind of incentive. So you give out points on, just like you would for a sprint race on Saturday, and then
yeah.
you reverse the grid. So whoever finishes first on Saturday starts dead last on Sunday.
Wow, that's cool.
I I mean, if we're gonna do it, let's do that.
Yeah,
That'll take into cost, it will definitely incentivize the faster drivers to take
yeah.
more chances in order to work their way up through the grid.
Right.
All right, so let's get on to the race itself, but first of all, let's take and talk about the chaos in qualifying and the triumph. So first and foremost, we have been singing, pretty heavily. We've been singing the praises of Kimi Antonelli, but this weekend, he definitely made some rookie mistakes, and the fact that he was able to go fast enough in Q1 that he was out of the relegation zone. So he was able to make it into Q2, but on his cool down lap at the end of Q1, he stuffs it into the barrier. And so he ends up having to start 15th. And then to add insult to injury for the Mercedes Benz in Q2, George Russell's car conks out before he's even able to set a time.
Right.
So first of all, your thoughts on Mercedes woes, and then we'll get into their woes during the race here in just a few minutes.
It's the curse of Monaco, especially it is. I know he's raced there before, but not in an F1 car, so probably just not used to the power. Hitting that wall the way he did. It's just one of those things that he's just not used to the dimensions fully. And again, we have to remember this is his maiden year. It's his first year
Mhm.
out. So
Yeah.
given everything else he's done,
Yeah, we'll give him a pass
yeah,
because because we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, the fact that, as brilliant as he has been during the first part of the season, you do have to expect he is going to occasionally make a quote unquote rookie mistake. And I think, we saw it last week at Imola, just simply because it was pretty much a home race for him.
yeah,
It's like,
right.
and I'm sure that all of the things that were swirling around him outside of the race car and everything were affecting his, brain. So we
Oh,
can give him a
absolutely.
pass,
Yeah.
for the first year. He hasn't quite learned how to drown all that out, on race weekend, but I
Hmm.
guarantee he will have learned from that. And then the same thing this weekend is, like you said, it was a learning experience because it was, a significantly more powerful car,
Yeah.
and before he stuffed it into the barrier, I mean, he had looked good all through
Yeah.
free practice.
Right.
So I think it was just he made a very tiny mistake, but as we all know, even the smallest mistake at Monaco will put you into the barrier and very much humble you.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that that's kind of where we were at because I mean he was in the top 10 through all of free practice and everything. So, and he was showing or I'm sorry, in FP1 he was 11th, but still, through every single practice he was showing improvement, he was showing, increased pace and everything. So
Hmm.
I really think that it was just more of a just wrong time, wrong place, type thing that,
Yeah.
that kept him from, advancing, further up the grid. But it's not like, George Russell had any better of a time of it in the fact that his car conked out because going over the bumps and everything, apparently the way that they had the ride height set up, it actually caused the car to switch off. And that's
Yeah.
what ended his day. So, I
Man.
mean, it was just a disastrous
Yeah.
weekend for, Mercedes, very uncharacteristic.
Yep.
Um, so I don't know. Your thoughts?
Yeah, same. It's a pity because these last few races they've been looking so strong and gathering a ton of points. So, one race, let's. I'm sure they'll get everything back in order next race.
Yep. Reset and on to Barcelona.
Yep. Yep. Exactly.
Yep. So on the flip side, though, of the qualifying woes of Mercedes, you had what had to have been, like I said, this was probably one of the most exciting qualifyings in recent memory. In the fact that it was like they all went out there. Charles Leclerc led every single free practice up to qualifying, and in the last seconds of qualifying, Charles puts it on pole and
Oh man.
Lando and McLaren did an absolutely spot
Yep.
on, perfect job of sending him out at the right time. Had a little more fuel load, so he was able to set a lap, had it on pole. Leclerc pips him, but he has just enough in the tank that he's able to go out there and do a last second heroic lap and puts it on pole. But not only does he put it on pole, but he does it in the first sub 70-second lap in the history of Monaco.
Yeah. Yeah. I know. So he got fastest lap of all time at
Yes.
Monaco. Just amazing work by him.
Yes. It was, I mean, I would rank I seriously, because I remember watching it live, so it's like I do have a reference point, and I would put his lap in the dry this last weekend. I would put it right up there with Senna's lap of the gods
Wow.
lap at Monaco.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would put it right up there with it, where he was just so inch perfect in every little movement. There was you could watch his hands in the car. There was
Yeah.
no extra movement that was unnecessary. I mean,
Wow.
he was so on it. I mean, it was like he was just like on another level.
Right.
And it was just fantastic. I mean, I thought it was probably, like I said, I really thought that it was probably one of the most exciting uh qualifyings in recent memory at Monaco. As the weekend went on, Lewis got stronger and stronger and stronger, to the fact that, and he ends up putting it fourth on the grid, so it's like it makes me, my next question to you is, do we think that Ferrari is finally turning the corner, or is this like Red Bull last weekend where it was
Yeah.
just this one weekend was more of a one-off because you had Charles Leclerc, his home race, he always goes well at Monaco, even when the car's not great.
Hmm.
And, Lewis is the same way. He loves Monaco. He always goes well in Monaco. I mean, he's won it so many friggin' times. It's is was it Ferrari or was it the drivers this weekend? Your thoughts?
Yeah. The problem that I have, I think the car is getting better, but the problem is, as we heard many times throughout this race, the engineer and Hamilton still aren't on the same page. Hamilton's always continuously asking him, "Hey, where's this? Where am I? This? What's the gap here? What do you?" He shouldn't be doing that. He should be concentrating on the race, and the race engineer should be telling him, "Hey, this is a strategy that we recommend. This is your gap. This is what you need to do. This is what you're currently doing." That should be just automatic, and we're still not seeing that. So I don't think our woes or the Ferrari's woes are over. Not until that communication, at the very minimum, is solved.
No, that's exactly where I was going to go. I mean, you literally took the words out of my mouth. Is that I do feel that the car is definitely getting better. They have definitely improved the car significantly over where we saw it, at the beginning of the year at Australia.
Yeah.
But you're right. But I think that a lot of Lewis's performance again was just this weekend. This is a track that Hamilton loves. He always goes well there, even when the car's not quite
Yep.
there.
Yep.
And I think that was really a lot of it is that this weekend just Lewis just hung it out there and he did everything that he needed to do.
Yeah.
So
Right. Yeah.
yeah,
It's disappointing because it's such an easy thing that if this guy can't communicate to Hamilton, then just get another engineer. I know it's not
yeah,
that easy, but you need
no,
to start searching because you got rid of Carlos Sainz, who was winning at your at Ferrari. You got rid of him, fine. I understand you put Lewis in. Okay, that makes an easy understanding what happened, why you did it. But now you're not taking advantage of Lewis. So that trade now makes less and less sense because they're not doing anything with Lewis, at least in my opinion. They're not doing enough with Lewis.
mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you've got a seven-time world champion in that second seat. You paid a lot of money to have him there. You need to be taking as much advantage of it as you possibly can, and
Yeah.
they're not maximizing the return on investment at the
Right.
moment.
Exactly.
You
That's
know,
exactly right.
yeah, and it's through no not as much fault of Lewis and the fact that Lewis is trying his guts
No,
out. I
yeah.
mean, he is driving his brains out, probably in the first time that he's had to do that since, his McLaren days.
Yeah.
So it's just they've got to do something to take and, you know, I mean, Lewis is making strides, but they need to do everything they can to take and help him accelerate those strides and get to, from point A to point B faster than what they're doing right now.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly.
So, all right. So the other thing too I wanted to take and talk about was Aston Martin's up and down weekend. Fernando Alonso, as always, he's another one of those drivers that loves Monaco. He always goes well there. He had a really great weekend, and Lance Stroll just stunk the place up again. Yet another Q1 exit for Stroll. I said at the beginning of the season, and I said during the first couple races when he, got bounced in Q1, I said I really didn't see him being in that seat after the end of this season. But I'm starting to wonder is is Daddy Stroll going to have is he going to have that talk with Lance sooner rather than later? And maybe they might need to be looking at promoting one of the reserve drivers mid-season because Lance just flat out isn't getting the job done and
No.
he's
No.
actually hurting the team at this point.
Yeah. I I don't know. I would think that my hope would be that that conversation has already happened and Lance is just driving, to drive at this point to finish up the season. I'm hoping that's the case. Because if not, then there's a much larger issue that I've talked about where if Lance isn't gone at the end of the season, then Aston Martin is just they're they spent a lot of money on somebody that's not on Adrian Newey and all the other people that they got throughout all the other constructors that they're spending a lot of money for basically one seat.
Yeah. Well, it's like it's almost like, all the noise that they have made about wanting to be a championship winning team, how they wanted to be at the front of the grid, how they wanted to be winning Grand Prix, how they wanted to win championships. And if he is still in that second seat, that tells me that no, they are not willing to take and do whatever it takes to be a winning team in the fact that he's still there. Because my next question to you is, if Lawrence Stroll wasn't in charge of the team and owned the team, do you
Let's be
think that
gone
they would have already made a change?
2 years ago, if not more. Seriously, he's there because, and everybody knows it. He's there because of who owns the company.
Yes.
So that's the only reason why Lance is there. I mean, forgive everything else. The when he beached his car last season, he should have been gone last season, just over that alone. But he wasn't. So one more season, and again, if he's not gone at the end of the season, then it's a joke.
Yes.
Aston Martin has spent a ton of money on all these resources, all these people for nothing.
And not only that, but what does it do to the morale of the team and all of these resources? Like you said, just that they've paid a lot of money for. They've brought them all in, said, we're giving you every tool that you need. If we don't have the tool, let us know. We will make sure that you have every tool that you need to be able to produce a championship winning
Yeah,
car, but yet you're not giving them the driver that's going to maximize all of these efforts. What does that do for the morale of the team? It's like,
yeah,
oh, well, I'm going flat out. I'm doing everything that I possibly can, but we got a shitty driver who's not going to get us where we need to be, and they
yeah.
refuse to get rid of him.
Well, what happens to the people that moved over from top tier teams on
Yes.
basically the hope and the dream that this was going to be a top tier team that they're going to help move forward? And
Mm-hmm.
then you still have Lance there. You're like, well, did I make a
Why am I
mistake?
sticking around?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Or
If
yeah,
somebody
it's
else,
time to go back. Right.
yeah, exactly. So yeah, I definitely think I'm kind I'm almost on the point now where I think that they may even if they just did it just so to kind of light a fire back under Lance's butt, maybe it's time that they pulled an Alpine and said, okay, you're going to sit out the next two races, and we're going to let the reserve drivers go out there and team up with Fernando, and let's see how they go compared to your lackluster performance this season.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, it's got to happen. Or, again,
Yeah,
don't spend all this money.
yeah.
Adrian Newey, I'm sure won't be there for, well, they threw they just
Yeah,
basically
I mean, he's
backed up
going to
the
be
truck.
there. But it's like, at what point does he finally start to, at what point does his morale
Yeah.
drop to the point where he's like, I'm willing to pay the exit clause and give up X amount of money. You've already given me a boatload of money, but at this point I've made my bones. I can go sit in the garden for the next couple years and enjoy my life and everything and not have to put up with this garbage.
Yeah.
At
Yeah,
what point does he
exactly.
say that, if they're not willing to make that change? So that,
Right.
I mean, I really do think that they're gonna have to make that change. And I personally, I would like to see it happen before the end of the season. Whether that's going to happen or not, I don't know. But at the very least, it's going to have to happen during the off season. They're
Right.
going to have to, put somebody else in that seat. It's
Yeah.
time for him to move on.
Yep. Wholeheartedly agree.
Yeah, because at this point we know that it's not the car, because we've seen
Yeah.
what Fernando has been able to do with that car. He qualifies at seventh. Now, admittedly, they had a pretty disastrous race and everything, and he got stuck behind, which we'll talk about next. He got stuck behind the other in traffic, after his first stop,
Hmm.
and couldn't really make much inroad during the race.
Yeah.
But I mean, he had a really great qualifying. He was fast all weekend and everything. So it's just, At what point does Fernando start to say, hey, if you don't give me a better teammate, somebody who can take and who can help me out,
Yeah.
then, what the hell,
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
So,
Yeah.
all right.
Yeah.
So,
Again, it has to this something has to happen with Lance. It just has
yeah,
to.
no, absolutely. Absolutely. So, all right. So now speaking about, poor Fernando and his woes and
Yeah.
everything, they were brought on largely the by requiring the two-stop strategy. The teams and, they basically talked to, you know, James Vowles during the Sky Sports telecast, and he was basically saying, hey, we're just playing the game at this point
Yep.
because the Williams went really well this weekend. They qualified, fairly well. So they take and they pit fairly early into the race, because they qualify 10th and 11th. I mean, not, they're middle of the field, but then, they, along with the Racing Bulls, basically what they did is they took and they went, had one driver who went, significantly slower to create more of a gap for their teammate in front of them. So their teammate could basically come into the pit, make their pit stop, and come back out ahead of the pack. Then they would swap places, and the driver who had already made their pit stop would basically do the same thing where he would
Right.
back it up so that the other driver, could pull out far enough a lead, in the hopes of being able to come into the pits, do what they needed to do, and get back out ahead. And, both Williams and Racing Bulls did that this weekend, which took, to me, that made the race that much more dangerous because as we saw, by George Russell's frustration,
Yep.
by Antonelli's frustrations, trying to get around these slower cars when they're intentionally backing them up and making it so much harder for, and in a place like Monaco where it's pretty much impossible to pass. It's just, I don't know. To me, that was one of the other things that I heard somebody else say, on another telecast, was the fact that the Formula One needs to put a stop to that,
Yeah.
because that made it more dangerous because it caused the frustration. And I heard somebody say, on another show, that one of the things that drivers, especially when they start to get to this level, because of the speeds and everything, one of the things that they are most reliant on is the trust
Yeah.
that they have in the other drivers and their abilities, because they've made it to this level. And when they're doing something like that, because at one point, I can't remember if it was Sainz or Albon, which one did it, but coming out of the tunnel into the chicane, they hit the brakes so early that it nearly caused multiple collisions behind them. But they were
Right.
doing that, in the effort of, trying to slow down the whole pack behind them and everything. And it's like, now it is in other drivers' minds is, okay, if Albon's nursing his tires or something along those lines, how can I be confident in knowing that he is going to brake at the same point where I
Yeah.
think he's going to brake?
Right.
And so I think that another thing that the F1 is going to have to say it next year is you have to drive within a uh, certain delta to the front runners. So if the,
Mm.
the front runners are doing, 1 minute, 12-second laps, then you need to be doing, within, just like in qualifying, you have to be doing within 109% of that. And
Yeah.
if you're not, then we're going to black flag you, or we're going to
Right.
make you take and do a drive-through penalty or something to
Yeah.
get you out of the way, so that other drivers behind you can get around.
Right. No, yeah, that would make a lot more sense than what, the two stop strategy, which, again, they tried to do something. So I don't really fault them for that. You know what I mean? They did what they could do. Just the teams were a little bit more creative than, than they gave them credit for.
Yep. Absolutely. So, all right. So, excuse me. All right. So, moving on from that, last thing, before we talk about this coming weekend, is the last thing is that Red Bull Verstappen had a fairly good weekend. At one point, he's leading the race. He held off on doing his last pit stop for as long as he could, hoping for a yellow flag or even possibly a red flag, because as the race goes on, drivers get fatigued, more
Yeah.
chance for mistake, more
Yep.
chances, and any even moderately, incident at Monaco usually results in a red flag.
Yeah.
He was holding out hope for the longest period of time, finally has to pull it into the pit, you know, makes his last stop literally with one lap to go, comes back out in fourth place. But you got to say, Verstappen and Red Bull had a lot to look back on to say, hey, we were the fifth best car and we finished fourth.
Yeah.
Not a win, but it's almost like a win in their mind, in the fact
Right.
that, maximize their points. And, the car wasn't that great this weekend. We saw Yuki struggle most of the weekend. I mean, he wasn't at the back of the pack. He was middle of the field most of the weekend. Pretty, not great, weekend he takes, and he gets hit by, poor Yuki gets hit by Gasly in the opening stages of the races because, being in the middle of the pack, he kind of, Red Bull took the gamble in trying to, pit him very, very early in the race. And then he takes and he gets stuck in the pack, behind the slower, cars that were backing up traffic and everything. So, I mean, kind of a good and bad weekend for Red Bull, but, I don't know. I don't know what I had a point there, but I have no idea what it was. All right, so real quick, we're running out of time here, so let's take. We've got this weekend is round three of the second triple header of the year. They are moving on to Barcelona, Spain, at the Circuit de Catalunya, which is always one of my favorite tracks. It is a fantastic track in the fact that it is very fast, lots of great elevation changes, lots of, good,
Hmm.
but it always takes and produces some pretty good racing as well. And I am really looking forward to, after the snooze fest of Monaco, I'm really looking forward to the race this weekend. And
Yeah.
so who do we think is going to go well this weekend? Do we think that is McLaren become a juggernaut, and can anybody catch them this weekend, or do we think that we're going to continue to see a resurgent Ferrari, and do we think that Mercedes is going to reset and look much more like they did at Imola than like they did at Monaco? So your thoughts?
Yeah. I think that we're looking at a juggernaut with McLaren. I don't see anybody really. That's going to be number one and number two, or number one and number three. They'll have podium.
Yeah.
And then beyond that, it's going to be a toss up between Max or with Red Bull, or somebody in Ferrari.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think that it's going to be I definitely think that, Ferrari is starting to, I really do think that they are starting to turn the corner. And I think that this weekend will be the true test of that. So we're going to
Yeah.
see how they run this weekend. And if they have another really good weekend like they did at Monaco, then I would say, yes, Ferrari is finally starting to get to grips with the new car. And I think that we're going to see kind of like we did last year, where they're going to kind of surge ahead in the latter half of the season. Now, is it going to be too little, too late, because they are so far behind the eight ball up
Yeah.
against McLaren? I have a bad feeling that that's going to be the case.
Yep.
But I do think that they will definitely give them a run for their money, at least, for race wins coming down the stretch,
Yeah.
especially after the summer break and stuff. And I do think that, as we saw, Mercedes was looking really good before the disastrous Monaco weekend. So I think that they'll go really well as there in Spain as well. And I really do think that Red Bull will go well there, in Spain as well. So I definitely think we're going to see, a much tighter fight between the top four, and I don't think it's going to be quite the runaway. I still think that McLaren will still come out on top, but I don't think it'll be quite the runaway like it was this last weekend.
Right. Yeah. 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 I'm excited.
Yeah.
Anything beyond Monaco.
Yes. Absolutely.
That in Las
Let's.
Vegas.
Yes. My nap is over, so that I took during Monaco. So let's move on to the next race.
Right on. Awesome.
All right, then. Okay, well, so I think it's time for me to take us out, don't you?
I think so.
Okay. All right, then. So thanks for riding along with us on another week of F1 Brake Check. Corey and I will be back next week with our recap of the action from the majestic Circuit de Barcelona, Catalunya. Until then, he's Corey. I'm Scott. We're the pundits of F1 Brake Check. Let's go!
Thank you for listening to F1 Brake Check. If you have enjoyed what you heard, don't miss a single episode by hitting that subscribe button in your favorite podcatcher, or you can watch the video version on YouTube. Help us grow by sharing us with your friends and fellow F1 fans. You can contact us on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, TikTok and X at F1 Brake Check. Our website is f1brakecheck.com, where you will find links to all our content. We value your passion and your feedback, so please take a moment to review our podcast. Your reviews help us grow and improve, and it means the world to us. Share your thoughts, rate us, and let us know how we can make the show experience even better. F1 Brake Check is a production of Brake Check Media. For your hosts Scott Vick and Corey Broom, until next time, keep yourself inside track limits, and try not to pitch it in the kitty litter.